Hi, folks. This is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report. You know, I just was made aware of a study that Berkeley did, and I wanted to pass this on to you because this does fascinate me. Well, Berkeley's a huge fishing company. They once were the biggest in the world, and they still may be. And so they wanted to study what shape of crayfish, because crayfish are a big part of the natural diet of a lot of species. So what shape of crayfish should they make their lure look like so that the fish will be fooled? In other words, what do the fish really see when they look at a crayfish? Well, one thing they're going to see is their pinchers. And what amazed the people at Berkeley, and it amazes me, is they discovered that bass actually prefer crayfish without pinchers on them, without their claws. And I'm thinking, is that really so amazing? Is that... I remember as a kid when I would use crayfish all the time, and you're bound to get pinched over and over. And if they were a healthy young crayfish of medium size and they latched onto you with their pinchers, believe me, it hurt. They could pinch your finger like crazy. And I used to think, don't bass feel the same thing? Why would a bass want to eat something like that that's going to pinch the inside of its mouth something crazy? Well, maybe it does. Even though their mouths are harder, and back then I didn't know if fish even felt pain. Some people said they didn't. So but still it amazed me. Well, now it doesn't amaze me. That makes sense. However, will the average fisherman know this? It's going in the store and going to part with his money to buy a new lure to catch fish. And I guess the scientists, even though they told that bass prefer them without pinchers, they always put claws on them because the companies that are making lures want them to look as realistic as possible. It made me think of other things that sort of correlate with this whole study of what is the best lure to use and what should it be shaped like. I remember frogs. When I catch frogs along the bank and use them as a kid, I was fishing my favorite trout stream, but in the summer the bass would get in there. And so then I fished for bass. And bass love frogs. And I thought, well, gosh, if they love frogs, if I can get a net and catch a bunch of pollywogs, these are baby frogs that haven't got some of their legs yet or whatever, the bass must really love them. But whenever I'd use pollywogs, I wouldn't catch 1 out of 3 fish that I catch with an adult frog. And I'm like, this makes no sense, but they don't seem to like the pollywogs. Maybe the pollywogs tasted differently. Maybe my experience is just mine, and maybe nobody else has ever seen what I did. But there were other things that I noticed, because back then, I used whatever I could catch along the bank or in the fields or in the woods when I was going fishing. Well, one of the other things that I always noticed, that the white worms, the bass like better than the red-looking little baby nightcrawler worms. They seem to like the white garden worms better. Then I'd take it to another thing. I'd notice that I'd go out and catch grasshoppers. And down south, I'd catch crickets and use those for bait. But I'd use grasshoppers. And there was some grasshoppers. And there were different types. I know there were different species of grasshoppers. But some of them worked far better than others. The bass seemed to like them better. They were shaped kind of the same, at least to me. But the bass had a preference. And finally, if I could be lucky enough to find some salamanders crawling along the bottom underneath the rocks where springs would come into the river, where the water was a little colder, that's where they'd seem to be. And if I put one of those on my hook, I was instantly rewarded with fish. They just loved them. So I guess the moral to this whole report and story is that a lot of times we think we have to use something to match the hatch. And there's a lot of essence and truth in that. You want to match what the fish seem to be eating at the time and like. But a lot of times fish will go for something that doesn't look like anything we've ever seen out there, that I think they may have never seen, but sometimes they prefer something we might not be aware of. And in the case of the pincherless crayfish, lesson well learned. Until next time, folks, this is Don Meissner with the North Country Fishing Report.